There is no other way to describe what we are seeing right now other than being a total historic failure of government. I mean, that's the reality when you look at what has just happened in Afghanistan, when you consider what's happening in terms of our economy on the inflation front. It's a total failure of the Federal Reserve, if you ask me. And then you consider what's happening on the border front and then the pandemic. I mean, you can go on and on. I mean, this is just one bad set of facts. And you know what? I would like this president to have a successful 4 years, if only because selfishly it's what's right for the country, right? If he does better, we all do better. And yet when you pile up all of these problems, I'm sorry, but this is a total failure. And it is high time that anybody who's not just, a complete extreme lefty, anybody who's middle of the road, anybody who's a little bit conservative, or even I'll take a little bit liberal, you know what? Come here. We need your help because the nation really and truly is under threat right now. Our economy is under threat. Our national security is under threat. And it's all so preventable. Policy matters. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. I am Trish. And just a quick reminder, if you have not downloaded this podcast on Apple iTunes or on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcast, please do me that favor. Do that right now. The other thing I need you to do, it's extremely important. Go to trishintel.com, sign up for my free newsletter, because then you'll get all the stories that I'm watching and that we are covering over on trishintel.com every single day. I've got some wonderful reporters, including myself. Thank you very much. And we're watching all of the news that's coming our way, and we're putting out what matters on the economy, what matters politically, what matters in terms of your investment portfolios, your future, all of that on trishintel.com. So please do me that favor. Go to trishintel.com, sign up for the newsletter. I will make sure that you get that every single day in terms of what we are following. But back to what is happening right now here on the ground that, in my view, is truly threatening and dangerous to our future. I want to share with you, because you know what, I'm a student of history. I was actually a American history major, colonial history in school, but have always loved history and have spent a lot of time on world history in general. But look, I think that this is an important thing to note. And by the way, this is not like uber sophisticated. This is coming from history.com. History.com, by the way. But I wanted to share with you this because let me read you this passage, and then I'll tell you about the economy that they're citing. Even as this region was under attack from outside forces, it was also crumbling from within, thanks to a severe financial crisis. Constant wars and overspending had significantly lightened imperial coffers, and oppressive taxation and inflation had widened the gap between the rich and the poor. They're talking about Rome, the fall of Rome, you see, because the economic troubles were a big part of why that empire fell. But in reading that, what I noticed, and I hope you picked up on as well, was that there's some similarities that can be drawn between those times and what we're experiencing now, specifically when it comes to constant wars and overspending, significantly lightening the coffers, right, of the federal government, as well as oppressive taxation and inflation, which does what? Widens the gap between the rich and the poor. Thank you very much. I'm glad that, we can get that from history.com, because you can't get that really anywhere else these days. Certainly not from the federal government. Certainly not from anybody in the White House. Certainly not from anyone at Treasury or at the Federal Reserve. You see, when you keep printing money, what you do is you help people that have money invested in the stock market, right? Because guess what? It costs that many more dollars to buy the stocks. So inflation actually helps the stock market. Inflation helps people who own their homes already, because then real estate prices go up. In fact, we just saw that real estate prices are at the highest level they've been at ever, like historic high right now, which actually could be a little bit of a warning sign. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, because I've been promising all week I would tell you about that, and it's important just as you think about the stock market overall, if you have a little bit of savings and you're trying to plan for your future, you want to also just recognize some of these warning signs that we have seen historically. One of them happens to be extremely high real estate prices, record real estate prices, unlike anything we've seen. So a little bit more on that in a second, but back to this idea here that, you know what, we have seen a widening gap between the rich and the poor. And this is something that's indicative of an unhealthy economy. And so these are things that need to be fixed. These are things that I would like to see our central bankers fix, but you know what? They have no interest because apparently they're too political right now. They're only focused on employment, which, by the way, is important this week because guess what we get tomorrow? We get the jobs report for the month of August. Now, if we are to take anything away from the ADP report, that's the private sector report that came out just yesterday, well, it doesn't look good, right? They're adding, 300 and something thousand jobs a month according to ADP right now, which is a little bit better than we saw the month before, in the tens of thousands of better, but really not enough to be where we need to be if we're going to really strengthen this economy. The expectation is that we'll get somewhere in the vicinity of 700 and something thousand jobs being added to the economy, and the unemployment rate is expected to go down to 5.2%. We shall see. On the one hand, a lot of people may want to go back to work because guess what? Those unemployment benefits, they're expiring like this weekend, okay? So it makes sense for people to want to be back in the workforce, and that may help boost those numbers a little bit. Simultaneously, if you don't have enough of an economy to support that, and we have seen now over the last couple of months increasingly that the expectation for all this growth just isn't materializing, and people are starting to get increasingly nervous, including employers. So it remains to be seen whether or not we get a good jobs report. If we don't get a good jobs report, well, that gives the Fed more ammunition to print away, right? I mean, so this is the Alice in Wonderland upside down world in which we now live, in which case the Federal Reserve may say, oh, you know what, okay, that jobs data is really bad. And then the market anticipates that somehow is good because then guess what, maybe they won't taper as fast as we thought they were going to, and they'll continue on as they're going to with these very low interest rates. But what does that mean for middle class workers? Right? I mean, that's what you need to think about right now because middle class workers really are the backbone of our society. They are the strength of our society. They're the strength of our country. And if we don't have a strong middle class, and right now I'd argue we don't, we have a strong upper class and we have a strong, if that's the right terminology, probably not, group of very poor people. But the middle class itself, people are slipping. They're slipping further and further and further down because life is that much more unattainable. I mean, prices just keep going up, and it's not like wages are keeping pace. I mean, wages, and again, we'll get this data on Friday to see how much they increased, but they're growing at a little over 1%, which, by the way, like a couple years ago, people would have been like, oh, maybe that's good. But when you have prices growing at 5.4% for the average consumer, guess what? A 1% and change increase in wages, it's not going to matter because prices are that much more. Therefore, life becomes that much more unattainable. And thus, we're back at that, what I call an hourglass economy, squeezing the middle with a lot on top, a lot on the bottom, very few in between, which is exactly, by the way, a parallel to what we saw before the fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, this is real stuff, okay? And somebody's got to actually pay attention to this. Right now we have a bunch of politicians, they don't care. And frankly, both sides are guilty of this because, I get it. The Republicans talk a good game. They want to be all interested in fiscal discipline, but they're not. No, I mean, when it comes down to it, if it's an opportunity to give something to their district, to their state, they're all in. And we need some people with some business acumen. Some people that can actually do math, right? That can add and subtract. That's what we need in Washington, D.C. right now, looking out for us. Simultaneously, we need people who are strong from a military perspective because this really was a debacle. We learned We learned now that there's a readout, by the way, of a call, Reuters published it, between current President Joe Biden and the former president of Afghanistan. And they're going back and forth. And this was on July 23rd, so like 4 weeks before the country fell. And the president of Afghanistan is asking for more support because, you know, they need the support because things are getting really bad. And basically, the president of the United States tells him to kind of, you know, keep up face, to put on a good front, regardless of how much the Taliban was advancing. So my point in saying this is only in that, you know, that Joe Biden has come out and said, well, you know, we didn't really know it was going to be this bad. Oh gosh, you know, you can't always anticipate these things effectively. And it turns out, yeah, he did know. He did know. And by the way, any moron ought to know. I mean, for goodness sakes, like, you know, an elementary chess player ought to be able to figure out the scenarios on the board. They knew it could happen, and for whatever reason, they didn't care. I don't dispute the need to get out of areas that we should not be in, right? That's actually pretty important and something I've talked about a lot and most surely support. I mean, again, I can read from history.com and you can figure out, you know, the fall of the Roman Empire. Part of it was that they had, you know, too much money going to defense, and they were defending themselves all over the place with this big, growing, expanding empire that they really, really should have condensed. But it's also how you do it, right? There needs to be a strategy, something that's thought out. This was not thought out, and consequently, we have 13 American soldiers that died. And that's on Joe Biden, and it's inexcusable, and I don't care what side of the political aisle you are on. This is not something to be swept under the rug. I realize a lot of Democrats now, they want to move on. They're, you know, calling conservatives the equivalent of the Taliban, including in Texas, because Texas is, you know, moving to outlaw abortion. And to me, it is so incredibly disrespectful to our country, to our heritage, to ever equate somebody who doesn't agree with you politically as the equivalent of the Taliban, right? The Taliban, they allowed Al-Qaeda to flourish, to exist, and therefore take out thousands of Americans. And the fear now, of course, is will the Taliban aid the Haqqani network, ISIS-K, any of these other bad guys that want to come in and establish themselves in that lawless land? And you know what? We again have only ourselves to thank. It's pretty shameful. It's wrong in every way. And yet, you know, this is the environment that we're in. I want to get to the markets and the warning signs that we're seeing right now, because I think it's important. I think it's important that you understand that and are at least aware of it. Whether or not you choose to act on it is entirely your decision. But there are some danger signs that we need to talk about. But before we get to that, I do also just want to mention one other thing, and that's the importance of focusing on understanding how important the next couple of years really are, right? I mean, you need to understand that there's a lot at stake. There's a lot that could happen. And if we're not thoughtful and careful about who we elect, we might be in a very different situation, specifically when it comes to the court. The court is the backbone. I talk about the middle class being the backbone of our society. Well, our courts, right, our Supreme Court is the backbone of sort of law and order. And right now there's an effort underway. You've heard me talk about it before. It's really important that you go and I want you to sign up at supremecoup.com. If you're watching this on video, you see it right there on your screen, supremecoup.com, because this is a group of folks that are very committed to making sure the Supreme Coup does not happen, including Americans for Prosperity and some other groups. They have 60,000 members now that have signed up. And I think this is something that we all need to protect. Right? We need to protect our court system. We need to make sure that Joe Biden is not successful. He's already appointed a commission, right, to look at this at the Supreme Court, because they want to pack the court. They want to actually put their people in there so that they can have exactly what they want, exactly what they need. I'm sorry, you know what? A few people died and few people left the court, so consequently, Trump got lucky. You got to put some conservatives in. I'm sorry, this is why, elections matter. This is why you actually need to go out and vote, because elections do have consequences, both from a policy perspective and also from the court perspective. You can't just wave a magic wand and say, you know what, we're just going to pack the court. I mean, this is what they did in Argentina. This is what they did in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was quite famous for this one, right? Before Maduro took over. Just pack the court, right? And then suddenly you get everything you want. It's wrong. It can't happen. And it's critical. It's up to all of us as Americans right now to take a stand. So go to Supreme Coup, Supreme, COUP.com, sign their petition, say that you're committed to this. I know you're committed to this because I have a feeling if you're watching or you're listening to this program right now, you are an individualist. You are somebody who believes in liberty for every single American, who believes in law and order and wants fairness. And this is part of that right now. So go to supremecoup.com and do sign up. But I want to get back to what's actually happening right now. Sign up for my newsletter, by the way, too. TrishIntel.com. I think that graphic just came up on the screen. So I do want to remind you of that. Do sign up for that. But listen, I mean, we are witnessing a pretty historic failure of government in every single way. And part of that concerns me right now is what it means for interest rates, the Federal Reserve, and therefore asset prices, and thus your retirement. And so I was looking at some data, and I want to just share this with you, because if you look back between if you look back to 1972 into 1973, what you saw was record high real estate prices. Record high real estate prices. And then that was followed between 73 and 74 with a roughly 45% plunge in the U.S. stock market. Fast forward, if you would, into 1986 into 87. Once again, you get highest real estate prices on record. And once again, you get none other than a big problem in the equity markets, right? The historic 1987 crash. And then let's go forward a little bit further. In fact, if you go to 2000, well, I would say all the way leading up to 2008, really those years 2004 through 2007 were really important. The Fed kept interest rates low enough to help facilitate, right, the ease of borrowing, and there was also an effort underway by those in Congress to make sure that everybody could get access to all these funds, and it didn't matter whether you could pay them back or not. I mean, that's what the no income, no asset NINA loans were. Didn't matter. No income, no asset. You could get whatever you wanted. And people took out whatever they wanted, and consequently, the entire system paid the price. But again, what you saw leading up to the financial crisis in 08 was record high real estate prices. And let's just think about where we are right now. This week, we got record high real estate prices. So what I can tell you is when you have that much in the way of demand for real estate, to the point where it's causing prices to escalate as much as they are, you tend to have some stresses on the system. And that is most likely why you then run into a situation where you have a financial calamity in the equity markets. The advantage we have now, of course, is having lived through 08. We've seen this movie before. Consequently, there were a lot of things put into place, mechanisms to try and ensure that banks have more liquidity, to ensure that they could, pass these stress tests, literally called stress tests, on the system. And they all seem to be doing okay on that front. So let's hope that all holds up. But to get back to my premise with this entire podcast, it's that I don't have a ton of faith in government right now. I really don't. So I realize that we've stressed the system, and that we try and realize that okay, all the banks will be just fine, and people will be able to pay their mortgages. It won't be a big deal. I still worry. I think that there's a lot of unknown out there in the way of what we saw in Afghanistan. We'll see what happens with Hurricane Ida's aftermath, right? Don't forget, Katrina in that same part of the country was a complete disaster. I've told you all about how I spent weeks and weeks and weeks on the ground covering the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and how sad it was because, look, people that needed access to trailers, and we had thousands of trailers being supplied by the federal government, they couldn't get them. And it was horrible to see. And I saw this and I was so frustrated as a reporter. I kept showing the video, right, of all the trailers on these parking lots and showing them the families that couldn't get them. And this was just pure bureaucracy, right, that was in the way. So lots of red tape. Then you factor in the mess that we have at our border, combined with the inflationary issues we're struggling with right now, which are all self-induced, right? It's all because we kept printing money. And you start to say to yourself, are we capable? Is our government capable? I think it's a real question right now. And this is why I think it's so important that people start demanding more, right? Like we should have higher expectations for our leaders. Years ago, it was like a big deal to want to grow up and be president or a congressperson or a senator or whatever. Now it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine a worse profession because of all the baggage, one that goes with it nowadays with the media, but simultaneously that you don't get the sense that anybody's really out there to do the right thing. They're just out there to get elected, and getting elected may not always coincide with doing the right thing, right? Because the right thing for the long run sometimes is a rough thing in the interim. So this is why we need, as Americans, to have higher standards and demand more. And together we need to do that. I mean, we really do need a plan. So I encourage you once again, go sign up for my newsletter at trishintel.com. Do make sure that you have subscribed to this podcast. That way you get it every single day on Apple iTunes or Spotify. It's really important to me that you do. And let's continue our conversation right back here again tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening, everyone.